Okay, I'll start over. Again, welcome to our Master Gardener class. I am recording now. All of our sessions will be recorded and I will upload those to a Google Drive so that you can go back and review them later. Let me see, getting some feedback. I may not be able to move that real quick. Okay, what I was trying to do is let one of our Master Gardener volunteers monitor the chat box. So, all right, again, I'm Carla Keene. I am an extension agent here in Montgomery County. I've been here about 23 years now. So this is about, I guess, about our 20th class. I had to skip a few years. But we welcome you and we're so glad to have you here tonight. And we're going to go through a little bit of an orientation, explain the program to you and what's expected of you and what you should expect of me. And so let me minimize this and we'll get it started. Small speaker view. Okay. Okay, can everybody online hear everything okay? Just give me a thumbs up or say yay. You can hear it okay? All right. All right. Yes, ma'am. That's what I was. Maybe that's what I need to do. Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to mute it and it wasn't working. Okay. Now doing this in dual mode is kind of tough here because getting a lot of feedback and stuff. So just please bear with me. All right. Well, tonight we'll have our orientation and we have our botany class. So it's good to see everybody. And okay, everybody should have received a pre-test through the email. If you did not get the pre-test through the email, I do have some hard copies here tonight that you can go ahead and fill out. But if you've already completed that and returned it to me, that is great. I just need those pre-tests back by next week at least, our next meeting at least. And I explained in the email how to answer those questions and just send me the list with your multiple choice answer next to it. And what we do at the end is we'll have a post-test. And so I take that and I compare your knowledge gained, basically. So you're not expected to know the answers right now, okay? So the hope is that you score higher on the end than you do at the first. So we have an increase in knowledge. So that is the way we test through extension. So, so we got that. We got some introductions. We've got some of our Master Gardener board members and certified Master Gardeners. Would you all like to come up here and introduce yourselves? You're going to have to come up in front of the camera though. We'll have a welcome from our president.
Welcome. I'm the president, and you can't see my badge, but this says 2017, which means 5 years ago, I was where you are. The main thing that I found with Master Gardeners, it's a great source of knowledge in terms of remembering all the stuff they teach you. No way in hell, don't even try to, but you're going to learn lots of good resources. And as I look out under this group, I see it meets one of my objectives. And that's, I want to lower the average age of our Master Gardeners. So thank you. You look like a nice young group. So that means you'll be able to do well on the volunteer work, which means looking around, there's a lot of, and I start adding 40 hours. We've got some good projects, but we could probably use some more. So as you're going through this, think about this. Look at the objectives of the Master Gardeners and think about it. If you've got an idea for a new project that meets the objectives of the Master Gardeners, you're welcome to bring it forward. We'd like to hear about it and you can get a chance to work on it. And with that, thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Beverly Gwynn. I'm the vice president in charge of programs. And I'm probably at the other end because my badge says 1997. So I've been here for a while. If you have any ideas on programs or you know of anybody that's a good presenter, tell me. And I'll bring them in. We'll have them speak at Master Gardeners and we could share each other's knowledge. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Donna Albright, and I am your secretary. So I'm going to write down everything we do in every meeting, and welcome.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, short and sweet. Well, we do have some others in the audience here. We're glad to have our certified master gardeners with us. Many times they will earn, they will earn volunteer hours by coming in and helping set up the class, get things ready, but they also can earn CEUs, which is education units, and we'll talk about that in a minute, by attending the classes and kind of renew their education. We usually have, same topics, but it might be different speakers each year. And so it'll change it up a little bit just by somebody's teaching style. So let's go. Okay, got that. All right, so the Tennessee Extension Master Gardener Program is a certification program through the University of Tennessee. It is a volunteer program, so you are expected to give back 40 hours of community service after completing this class and taking the post-test. So we will learn about plant sciences, we will learn about entomology, which is insects, we will learn about plant diseases. We're going to start out with botany and soils, because I think you've got to start from the ground up and learn about the soil, and you've got to learn about the plant parts and pieces and how they all work together. And then that kind of gives you a baseline for the rest of the classes that we'll have throughout the next 13 weeks. So let's see. So every master gardener, as a certified master gardener, you are considered kind of in the role as a UT or TSU employee. And we expect you to, follow the guidelines of the university, follow our recommendations. We do have a code of conduct. That's just kind of basic stuff here, because when you are out working on a project or you are talking to people in the community, you are representing the university as a master gardener. So it's important that you give the researched information. And if they ask you a question, you need to look up the answer. And if, most people are okay with, I'll wait, go get me the answer and then come back. So don't just try to wing it and give something off the top of your head, or a home remedy or something like that. We want you to go back to the materials, either in your book or on our website that we've got, and find the right answer to that question. And so you'll learn eventually. You're not going to learn everything and come out with a college degree, but you are going to know the right people to contact to find the answers and to work with the people in the community and work on the projects. So you're also, you are covered as a master gardener while you're working on projects. You are covered by the university's risk and liability department. And so if you were injured working on a project, that would cover your injuries. So like I said, we treat you as an employee of the university. So hopefully we'll never have anything like that happen, knock on wood. Not in 23 years, we haven't had anybody hurt. So you all should have seen the schedule. Most of the classes are set in stone. I'm still waiting on a couple presenters to get back with me on, who's going to speak at a certain time. So you had your schedule that was emailed to you. The link for the class will be the same each week, so you can just go back to that schedule. I do send out reminders on Monday. I'm getting some feedback from somewhere. What's that? I hear a phone. Okay. Okay, sorry. Just picking it up in here. Okay, so you got your schedule, you've got the link. I will send out a reminder email, usually goes out on Monday mornings, reminding you of the class on Tuesday. I will send a link to that Google Drive where I've uploaded the materials from the class from the week before. And then you'll be able to go to that site and download any of the presentations, the recordings, and any supplemental materials that the presenters might provide. You should have received your Master Gardener handbook. So as you know, some of you signed up as couples and some of you signed up as individuals. So couples just get one book. And so sometimes after you realize how the book is set up, you may decide to order your own book. The books will still be $80. Okay, so if you are a couple and you decide that you need another book, let me know and I can order some more and we can take care of that. So, but our Master Gardener handbook was rewritten. I guess it's been within the last 3 years. You will notice that chapter 12 is missing. That is the section on fruits. I will have a supplement by the time we have that class. If I don't get the one from the university that Dr. Lockwood is writing, I have another one that I will make copies of for you to stick in your book. So as far as I know, that section 12 on the fruits and small fruits is the only one that we should be missing. If you look at your first chapter or first little section in that book, it's the Master Gardener handbook. And that goes over the guidelines of the program. So if you have any questions later on, like what might count as hours, can I do this, can I do that? You know, you can always go to that first and look, but if you have a question, you can always call or email me and say, hey, will this work for volunteer hours or not? Would you approve this? Things like that. So that first part of that handbook goes over what your expectations as a Master Gardener. So as I said, I will be uploading, not to Dropbox, I'm using a Google Drive. I thought I changed that earlier. We usually try to go about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we'll take a short break, and then we'll come back to the program. We are not providing food at this point, but you are welcome to bring your own dinner in. Go ahead and bring something in to snack on, to munch on. We will provide coffee and waters. But I'm kind of, the food thing, we haven't quite got back to that. I mean, everything really needs to be packaged. The buffet style, you know, is just another way to pass germs around, and we're trying to be very careful about that right now. So that's one thing that I just eliminated to try to protect you all from the virus that is roaming around still. And of course, you've seen in the email that we do recommend masks. You don't have to wear them. But if we are in close contact with each other, it is a good idea. It's recommended for you to wear your mask if you can. So, but yeah, feel free to bring in your own food, and because I know it's right about dinner time. So I'm going to miss that part, but I just felt like we didn't need to do that this year. So, okay, so now we're going to go over your volunteer hours and all that good stuff. So as a Master Gardener, of course, you're here tonight. You're going to be attending. It's a practical and intensive training program. As I said, you're not going to come out with a college degree in horticulture or anything like that, but you are going to learn a lot, and you're going to learn where to find the answers and who to go to. And so we're going to teach you about Tennessee plants, about gardening, about stewardship, and then you will be able to share that knowledge with others. Okay, and that is what is expected of you as you get more comfortable and you learn more. Giving back to the community is a big part of this program. So as Master Gardener interns, which you are right now, you must complete and document a minimum of 40 hours. You can go over 40 hours, and we don't mind that bit, but you have to complete at least 40 hours within the first year. And so you have from now until next August, actually, to complete your hours. Usually we go on a yearly calendar. So even if you finished your hours early, you still won't receive your badge and certification until December. So every December we have a banquet, and we acknowledge you as finishing your class, give you an attendance certificate. And then we have the people from last year's class that have completed their 40 hours and will be graduating, and they get their formal certificate and their name tag and such. So, okay. So, yep. Oh, interns. We do have association meetings. We have the Montgomery County Master Gardener Association. As interns, you do not have to pay dues the first year while you're an intern. And then after that, you can choose whether you want to join the association or not. And of course, we encourage you to do that and become involved with our group as it grows. And, you know, we do a lot of fun things. We have a monthly meeting. We have 2 plant sales each year. We have 13 ongoing projects for you to do your Master Gardener hours. Sometimes they take field trips. We meet at people's houses and
Seed swaps.
seed swap. No, yeah, seed swap. Sometimes plant swaps. We used to do plant swaps too. So, but you can attend those meetings and I'll send out the announcements. Email is going to be the main contact for me with y'all. So you really need to watch your email and check the attachments that I send and things like that. So, okay. So after you become a Master Gardener, you've done your 40 hours and you're certified, like this little group back here in the corner. Like I said, you get your little name tag and everything. And if you want to stay as a certified Master Gardener, you go through recertification and you're required to give 25 hours or more per year and earn 8 CEUs. So right now they're earning CEUs because they're gaining education for themselves. And so, so your 25 hours of volunteer service plus 8 hours will keep you certified and in the program. Okay. And as I mentioned before, and I know the association doesn't like me to say this, but you can be a Master Gardener without being an association member. I'm just going to say it quickly so they don't kill me from here. So, but we do encourage you to join the association. They're a great network of people. We have all the projects and all the networking you're going to get from that group. So, your hours right now, I would just, well, you can't start your hours until after the class ends. Okay, so really January 1st, you're going to start your hours. And I'll go over in one of our later meetings how to set up your profile online and how you gain your hours or how you report your hours and such. So, but while you're taking the class, you're still an intern and you're not supposed to be out doing hours. So that rule changed a few years back. So once you do start to complete your hours, if you're traveling, let's say you're coming out to the extension office to work on the landscapes, that is one of our projects. It's Betty. So if it takes you 20 minutes to drive over here, you work for an hour and drive home is another 20 minutes. So that means an hour and 40 minutes of volunteer time. Okay. And you also keep track of your mileage. So however many miles, and that is reported online also. And so we put a dollar amount on your volunteer hours and we put a dollar amount on your mileage. And that is turned into an impact statement at the end of the year, which I turn into the state along with all the other Master Gardener coordinators. And then they do a report for the full state that goes to the federal government. Says, hey, we're doing our job. We need to support these extension agents in these positions. So that's why we need the impact. So if you are going, like if you're going to go to attend the session and you're just gaining CEUs, you can write down your mileage, but that doesn't count as your hours. Like if you travel an hour to Nashville to go to the Lawn and Garden Show and attend a program there, you don't count your mileage. You just count that time sitting in a meeting, getting education for yourself. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. And we have different levels of volunteers. And of course, you all are interns. You're just beginning interns. I guess we would say we got our advanced interns that are almost finished. And so you're participating, getting those 40 hours done, starting in January. Certified Master Gardener has taken the course, done that 40 hours, completed the test, And then they continue to maintain that 25 hours and earn 8 CEUs each year. And I do keep track of that. It's all on an online system. It makes it much easier than the paper trail we used to have to chase down years ago. So we also give awards. And so a Master Gardener VIP is either somebody that has done something really spectacular throughout the year, or you've had at least 3 years of service. Usually, if you have 3 years of service, I'll give you a VIP pin at our celebration in our banquet in December. We also recognize our 5-year, we have a 5-year pin. And then your lifetime Master Gardeners, we go 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And at that point, when after you've done 10 years or 15 or 10 years or more, I should say, you only have to report 15 hours worth of volunteer work per year. And so that is at 15 hours combined of volunteer hours and CEUs. So we do that for people that have dedicated themselves to the program for 10 years or more. Okay, so, but to be eligible for these, we've got to have it on record. So we also have Gold Club members. Okay, and this was started out as kind of a challenge. Several years back, we had our 100-year anniversary. I think it was in 2010. So it started out as 100 hours for 100 years of extension. And so we decided just to continue that. And so if you do 100 hours, you get a certain style pin. If you do 200 hours, 300 hours, 400 hours, we're going to recognize those people with a different type of pin. Okay, so that's why I say, you know, once you reach your 40 or you reach that 25, you can continue, and then you kind of get this bonus of being recognized for the hours you've given each year. If after you've taken the course and you've completed your 40 hours, if for any reason you need to take a leave of absence, that is a possibility. If you have health reasons, we have a lot of military folks in the area. And sometimes they'll be here and they'll barely get their hours done, and then they have to move on. You know, every 2 years, every 3 years, they'll have to move on. So if they think they're coming back to Clarksville, they might just take a leave of absence and then be able just to come back and, you know, keep all their records. Or if you transfer to another state, like if you went to Georgia or whatever, I can send a letter and you can join their Master Gardener Association in that state. So once you become certified, we can do that for you. And that's what happens when, you know, if somebody comes in from another state, I will get a letter from their extension agent in their county. And, you know, we'll just bring them into the program. We usually recommend that they go ahead and take the class so that, because to become more familiar with the Tennessee landscape and such like that. So we have active status. That means you're actively working on the projects. We have the inactive status. If you need to take like a leave of absence, you would be considered inactive. And I mark you down as inactive, and that takes away from your years of service. You skip that year, and then I would start counting again, if that makes sense. Okay, because you have to be reactivated. We have a form to reactivate you, and we just kind of start you over again. Okay, so if you had 5 years in, then you had to skip 2 years, you'd still have 5 years, and then you would start earning again 6, 7, 8, 9. So I think I mentioned the lifetime status. There's kind of a bonus. You have to do less volunteer hours, but they changed the rule on this. It used to be once you hit 10 years, you did not have to do any hours anymore. Well, the risk and liability, because people wanted to stay active and be a member of the association and be a part of the state program. Well, if you're inactive, you're not covered by the university's insurance. So in order to stay active, if you're a lifetime, we still need you to do at least 15 hours per year and report that to me. And I already mentioned the out-of-state, if we bring in out-of-state people too. So you all, for your first year, you do not have to earn any of these CEUs. This will come after you're certified. 8 CEUs per year. That's just when you're gaining education for yourself, like attending lectures or coming back to the classes and such. Okay. We recommend, or you're allowed to miss at least 3 out of the 13 sessions. Okay, and if you will let me know that you're going to miss a session, I can give you a study guide sheet. And the questions on the study guide will force you to go to your book to find the answers. You turn in that study sheet to me, and that will be like an excused absence. Okay, so, and that helps you to go back and look at the material and learn what you missed. Okay. And all presentations are going to be loaded up to that Google Drive. Yeah, I want the pretest back by next Tuesday. If you've not done it already, check your email. Just give me the answers back by next Tuesday. I used to give a pretty hard test, and I kind of backed off on that. And you'll talk to some of the former master gardeners, and we used to, I mean, I had them do the landscape design and the whole 9 yards, and everybody was like, oh, this is too hard for a volunteer program. So I really just need to judge the impact or evaluate the impact of the program. And so that's why we do the pre-test and the post-test now. So, and the post-test will be given on the last class. So here is a website you might want to go ahead and write down. This is, and bookmark this site, because this will have the link to Master Gardener resources. It will be the place that you go to put your reports in, put your Master Gardener hours in. You can sign up for the listserv, and that's where you get on a mailing list, and you'll get newsletters from the state association or the state program, state coordinator, about classes that are coming up. And so they will do a lot of online classes, especially starting in the spring. Yes, I will eat. Okay, we got a question in the chat. Yes, after the session, you will be emailed a link to the Google Drive. So right now, this is our first class. I haven't loaded anything up, so there's nothing there yet. So by next Monday, you will have the link to the Google Drive. Okay. All right. Oh, this will be posted on the Google Drive, so that address will be there also. Everybody good? All right, your instructors will be professors from we use people from Austin Peay or different universities, University of Tennessee, Tennessee State University. We do have our Master Gardeners teach or other local experts. Typically have the city forester come in and teach like the woody ornamentals, and just people that are really good on a certain topic, we'll bring them in to teach. So you don't have to listen to me all 13 weeks. So some of the differences that you're going to see. Some of your presenters may be very much advocates for chemicals. Okay, and that's going to be a recommendation, a part of a management practice. Okay, but we will also have some that will advocate the use of organic gardening. I like to give both and look at a sustainable landscape management plan or a garden plan, whatever, using the least toxic pesticide or control as possible. Identify the insect, identify the disease, the problem before you just go out and spray something. Okay, so I feel like during the turf talk, you're going to hear a lot about chemicals. So when we talk about gardening, you're going to hear a little less about chemicals and synthetic chemicals. So you will hear a little bit of both. Let's see. I don't do a study guide anymore. It just, with the new handbook, it's got study questions in there, so I don't do a study guide anymore. And most people are going to be following, most of your presenters will follow the UT presentations, okay, and some of them will add their own material in there. So we give them core material to follow. Give them a slide set, a presentation that's canned, ready to go. So. Okay. All right, now, do you all have any questions for me? Yes, ma'am.
During these 13 weeks, if we do have volunteer hours, do you want us to provide them through you?
You cannot count your Master Gardener volunteer hours until January.
I know we can't count it for ourselves, but I thought you might want to count it in the program.
No, I can't really, because you're not a certified Master Gardener yet, or you're not well, you are an intern, but you're not supposed to be giving advice yet because you haven't gone through the whole course. So, no, I'm sorry. You just got to wait until you've completed the class to really start volunteering. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Let me stop sharing my screen. Mr. Stephen, are you ready to go?
I am ready, Carla.
Okay, let me turn this up. Oh, I'm trying to close. Okay, there.
Okay.
Okay, tonight we have with us Stephen Smith, and Stephen is, well, he will be a Master Gardener in December. He's beyond the Master Gardener point. His parents, his father's a Master Gardener, been with us since the beginning of the program here in Montgomery County. And Stephen's one of the smartest, I still call him a kid, smartest kids that I know. Are you like 25 and you got your PhD?
Yep. Yeah.
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 One of them things. So Stephen works at Roughwood Seed Collection, Roughwood Gardens up in Pennsylvania, and I'm sure he'll tell you a little bit about that. And we're very pleased to have him with us tonight to teach us botany. So you go ahead and start speaking, and we'll make sure that everybody can hear you. I've got speakers I may have to put in as we go along.
Okay, perfect. Hey everyone, as Carla said, I am Stephen Smith. I am
Okay.
the manager for the.
Hang on, I can't.
Gotta love technology, but only when it works.
I just forgot to plug in the speakers. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead for me, Stephen.
Okay. Hi everyone, as Carla said, I am Stephen Smith. I am the manager for the Roughwood Seed Collection here in Devon, Pennsylvania. We are about 30 minutes outside of Philadelphia.
Okay,
I am
hang
also-
on. Okay. It's not picking me up either at all. Okay, go ahead and just test.
Okay, test. Test.
I don't know how to turn it up.
You have to go to settings.
Hold on. Okay, did another test.
Test.
There we go. All right, we got you.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome. Okay. Hi, everyone. By the time I get done saying this 5 more times, you'll know who I am, probably at least. But as Carla said, I am Stephen Smith. I am the manager for the Roughwood Seed Collection here in Devon, Pennsylvania. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We were about 30 minutes outside of Philadelphia. And I am also now the president for the new mother organization that is over the Roughwood Seed Collection, the Roughwood Center for Heritage Seedways. And as Carla said, I do have my PhD. It is in plant breeding and genetics with a double minor in entomology and weed science as well, from Nebraska-Lincoln. And I'm a big plant nerd, so I love giving this. I gave the same botany introduction last year to the Master Gardeners then, so I love doing it. And a lot of people always ask me, because before I switched majors, I was a botany major. So people always ask me, well, what is botany? And botany is the study of plants. And you need an understanding of basic botany, plant physiology and environmental factors that will affect plant growth. And if you can understand these 3 key concepts, you can pretty much have a pretty good knowledge of horticulture as a whole. And horticulture is the art or the practice of garden cultivation and management. One of the biggest things that I cannot stress enough in botany is knowing plant classification and nomenclature, because with our modern technology that we have today, we know so much more about plant genetics than we did 300 years ago. So it's always nearly constantly changing. And it's very annoying when you're me trying to figure out, well, what is a sunflower now after they've reclassified it for 8 different times? But botanical names are preferred to what most of us know as common names. Botanical names are recognized on an international level, and they usually and typically only apply to one plant. And I say this because all of us know what a squash is, but there are dozens upon dozens of, if not hundreds of different types of squash. And what you know as a zucchini has 3 other different names in another country or something. And of course, Carolus Linnaeus was a Swedish botanist who published Specie Plantarum in 1753. He is the father of what we know as binomial nomenclature that gives a plant, animal, fungi, whatever, a 2-part name, a genus, and a species. So an example would be something that most of us may have heard of or at least seen, is Echinacea, or the coneflower. It is in the family Asteraceae. Your family, everything within a family is going to end in Acea or Acea. And in this case, it's the aster family, the sunflower family, if you will. They basically have a set of underlying features that establishes them as a family. And then you get down into the genus, which is a group of 1 or more plants that share a wide range of characteristics. They all generally look alike within a genus, but they are different. And all of your scientific botanical names should be in italics. That is part of what was established to designate them so everyone can differentiate them from everything else. And a species within the Echinacea genus would be Echinacea purpurea, the purple coneflower, which is a beautiful plant, great for gardens, a native of Tennessee. Tennessee has its own species. And a species is a group of plants that are capable of breeding together to produce offspring that is similar to themselves. And species are given a two-part name, which is also printed in italics. And you also get into subspecies, which are naturally occurring. They're just a underset, if you will, of a species. They're usually an isolated population. So say with like, we'll go with this species, the thin-leaved Echinacea angustifolia, subspecies angustifolia. It is a more widespread species, but you have others that are limited to only one location in one state or only limited to a couple states. And then you get into things which can be confusing, varieties, cultivars, with like Cercis canadensis variety alba, that is a white flowered version of what we all know as a redbud tree. And varieties are usually just subdivisions of a species that usually vary in some form of their features, in this case, white flowers. And then you have cultivars, which are human-made, usually human-bred, human-created hybrids or selections. In this case, we have a coneflower, Echinacea purpurea double-decker. And you also get the Echinacea genus has about 10 species in it. When you get into like orchids, there's hundreds of thousands of different species. And someone can tell you, well, that's a coneflower. And you would have to realize, well, what species are they talking about? And some of these have other names. Echinacea is also called Black Samson or Black Samson. So you do run into that issue in this plant world quite often. At Roughwood, I oversee 5,000 edible food and flowers from all over the world. So it's a very easily confusing thing with nomenclature. And this is an example. On your right is Echinacea angustifolia, a naturally occurring species, even though this is a very blurry picture. And on the left is the human-bred cultivar that was released a few years ago called Echinacea purpurea double-decker that I was mentioning. You can see they look the same in most characteristics, but they are very different. Humans have loved tinkering with plants for thousands of years. So in this presentation, we're going to go through an introduction. We're going to go through plant parts and functions, plant growth and development, and environmental factors that affect plant growth. All flowering plants have certain structures and functions in common. There are also common responses to environmental conditions that basically nearly every plant responds to. And then we're going to look what plants have in common, some differences between these plants, and applying this information to practical gardening. So plants are split between non-vascular and vascular plants. Non-vascular plants are typically primitive. They are what most of us would know as a liverwort, as moss, because they lack the conductive tissue for the circulation of water and nutrients. And these are usually causes them to be confined to swamps or wet areas. Back in the day, prehistoric Earth had gigantic liverworts and mosses at one point. And they're usually not of any value. I mean, I do know people that are like moss fanatics. They actually collect moss, but I need something that flowers because I just don't like moss. I mean, they usually are dull in appearance and they're not really of value for a landscape. Unless you're decorating your roof with it, I suppose. But vascular plants include flowering and non-flowering plants. They are exceedingly diverse. And thanks to their roots and shoots, it has allowed them to adapt to hundreds of thousands of different habitats across the planet. And this also helps them, of course, to establish themselves and thrive. This is a generic plant parts graphic, this is a pepper plant. Nearly all flowering plants have flowers of some nature. They have fruits, they have leaves, they have stems, seeds, and roots of some nature. Because that's how they reproduce. Buds, of course. And then with vascular plants, it's pretty much what we all know as a normal plant. This is a more detailed diagram showing you the difference between certain groups of plants, but they all have flowers, leaves, nodes, buds, stems, roots, and everything of that nature. And we're still talking about vascular plants. So you can think of the parts of a plant divided into two groups, reproductive and vegetative. The reproductive parts, of course, include your flowers, your flower buds, fruit, seeds, the petals, and the vegetative includes the roots, the stems, the leaves, and leaf buds. Many vegetative parts can also be used in asexual or vegetative reproduction, which would be cuttings, grafting, layering, etc. Stems, of course, are a very important part of a plant. They support the buds, the flowers, the leaves. They also play the key role of transporting water, minerals, and sugars through the plant. The points where the leaves develop along the stem are called nodes, which you can see in this graphic of a lilac shrub. Where the leaves join the stem is a node or internode. And that's where the leaves would join the stem. Sometimes, and it'll be in another slide, but sometimes your leaves will be paired like this, and other times your leaves will be just one leaf here and there. It all depends on what plant it is. And the length of a stem, and which also goes for a node or internode, depends on many factors. Vigorous plants that are healthy, they tend to have longer internodes than less vigorous plants. If any of you got into the big gardening world after COVID and started your seedlings inside, you probably noticed that when they were in less light, they started to stretch. Which stretch their internodes because reduced light causes the plants to have to grow internodes in order to reach the light in order to be able to photosynthesize. So in one sense, it's like, well, what matters, because we all know that stems pretty much hold the plant together. But a more key important part of stems is that many plants root at these nodes, and some plants will only root at the nodes. Short, stocky transplants are more likely to develop when plants grow in strong light, have proper adequate spacing, and are only moderately fertilized. Some plants, if you take cuttings, they will not root if you do not cut them properly at the right node. Because that's where the roots can actually form from. And there are different types of stems. A shoot is what we refer to as a young stem that has leaves present. A twig is a stem which is usually less than a year old and has no leaves, typically because it is in the winter dormancy. A branch is a stem which is more than 1 year old and typically has lateral stems, which we will get into. A trunk is the main stem of a woody plant, typically a tree or a shrub. Trees usually only have one trunk, but shrubs can often have multiple. Vines produce long trailing stems that are sometimes able to support themselves by climbing or twisting upon themselves. Or typically they attach to another plant, or those of us that grow vines, they attach to a trellis, an arbor, or whatever we provide them. And canes are stems that usually live only a year or two. And you can think of plants with canes as roses, blackberries, raspberries, grapes, plants like that. And the inside of a stem is also important to know because they consist of several different layers of tissue. Just like we have different layers of tissue, and us as humans, plants do too. They have a xylem, which is what conducts the water, the nutrients, and the minerals from the roots, and it brings it to the rest of the plant. And the xylem is also what generally forms the wood part or the woody part of woody plants. The phloem is usually comprised of much of the inner bark of woody plants, and it is what conducts the sugars from the leaves to the buds, the growing points, to the fruits, and to the storage areas. The cambium layer is a meristem tissue. It is a site of cell division and active growth. It's located between the xylem and the phloem, and it is what is responsible for stems growing in diameter. The apical meristem or the apical bud is the main stem of the plant. It's the main dominant bud, and it is what is responsible for the stem elongating or growing longer. And because the xylem and the phloem conduct the water, the nutrients, and manufacture substance throughout the plant, they are what we call vascular tissue. And there are two distinct arrangements of vascular tissue, dicots and monocots. Dicots have their vascular tissue arranged in rings, which most of us have probably seen in trees. Monocots have their veins arranged in bundles, and their vascular tissue is usually arranged in bundles. Corn is a very typical monocot. Most grasses are, orchids, lilies, irises, palms are all monocots. And this is an example of the difference between monocots, or their full term monocotyledons, and then dicotyledons. And you can see in monocots, the vascular bundle, the phloem, and the xylem, they're in these little bundles that are more spread out than in a dicot. And in dicots, the vascular bundle consists of the phloem, the cambium, and the xylem all together. They usually have the ring in them, which is why trees and other plants have rings. Most monocots, they lack the cambium tissue that dicots have, that's between the xylem and the phloem. And this typically means that a mature monocot stem does not increase much in diameter. They reach a certain point of diameter growth, and then they usually stop. They usually keep growing upward instead of outward. And then, of course, dicots, they continue to increase their diameter throughout their lives. Trees, we all know, they keep growing larger and larger each year. And with this knowledge of stem structure, you can understand how a rodent chewing the bark of a tree will kill the tree, or deer that rub their antlers against fruit trees can damage the cambium layer, because it's the cambium layer that produces the new xylem and phloem. And the cambium layer of both plants must be aligned in the case of grafting. If you're going to graft something, they have to be lined up, or your graft will not be successful. And this is another good way to look at the difference between monocots and dicots. With monocots, they have one cotyledon when they germinate. With their embryos, dicots usually have two. You can think of beans having two cotyledons when they first sprout. Again, monocots have parallel veins usually. Dicots have net-like veins. The vascular bundles in monocots are complex, and they're usually in rings with dicots. Most monocots have a fibrous root system, which we will get into, and dicots usually have a tap root. And typically monocots have flowers that have their parts in multiples of 3. And with dicots, it's usually in multiples of 4 or 5. And as I'm sure some of us are probably aware, plants are usually classified by how long they live. Annuals produce their seed and flowers and die within single growing season. It's basically a wham, bam, and done in a single year. Most of the things that people grow, cantaloupes, corn, marigolds, zinnias, sunflowers, they are all annuals. They complete their life cycle in one season. Then you have biennials, which produce leaves and food organs, food storage organs, the first growing season. If any of you are familiar with thistles, which are a common pest plant in Tennessee, they will produce a rosette of leaves the first year, and they will flower the second year. And they won't produce seed or fruit or anything until the following season. They generally require a winter period in order to trigger their reproduction. And a lot of the plants that we consume, carrots, cabbage, hollyhocks, Brussels sprouts, kale, they're all biennial if you are wanting to save seed out of it, which is what I do for a living at Ruffwood. Perennials are what most of us are probably familiar with. They live 3 or more years. Woody perennials have shoots and roots which survive many years, which would be trees and shrubs. Herbaceous perennials have shoots which would die back in the winter. And these are like hardy hibiscus, most lilies, and majority of the wildflowers are perennials as well. And we're going to go into leaves. Of course, leaves are the primary organ that manufacture food for a plant. You can think of them as a factory for the plant. They can be narrow, like pine needles, or they can be broadleaves, like most other plants, which we're probably more familiar with. And with plants, there is a huge diversity of leaf shapes, of sizes, forms, arrangements. And this is solely because of the amazing adaptability that plants hold in order to survive in all of the habitats that they grow in. Leaves will generally consist of a leaf blade, a midrib, and smaller veins. The petiole is kind of like a branch that holds the leaf. It's what connects the leaf itself to the stalk. And in this picture of a green bean, these would be your cotyledons. This would be a dicot because it has 2. Your leaf blade is the leaf as a whole. The midrib is this dominant vein that goes down the direct center of your leaf. These smaller veins, of course, are the network that goes across. And then you have the petiole, which connects your leaf to the stalk or the stem of the plant. And as I said, the principal function of a leaf is to manufacture the sugars in a process that we call photosynthesis, which we will be discussing later. And a very important component of photosynthesis is light. And that's why leaves are generally flat. The larger the leaf, the more absorption of light they have, the more efficient that absorption is. While the veins that run across the leaf are what conducts and moves water, sugars, and other items brought through and to the leaf from the roots. The greatest division within leaf types is between deciduous and evergreen foliage in trees and shrubs. Evergreen leaves are usually shed and replaced throughout the year. They are also always present. They're green throughout the winter. Most magnolias are, pine trees, cedar trees are good examples. Deciduous leaves are all replaced each year, what most of us deal with in the fall when the trees de-leaf. And they lose their leaves in the fall not only because of the cold weather, but also to minimize moisture loss during the winter. And in this complex picture here of a leaf, we can see just how complex the actual leaf structure is, much like our own human anatomy. It's very complex. The same can be said for the leaves. It's comprised of several layers. And just like we have skin or our epidermis, plants do too, leaves do. And like our skin is to protect our inner organs, that's the exact same function of the epidermis on a plant. With leaf veins and arrangements, the term veination refers to the vein pattern in a leaf blade. These are 4 of the different types of veination. One that is on this spinach or chard leaf is pennant veination that has one main rib with 2 branches going off. This is most plants. In number 2, you have a palmate veination with various veins, midribs that go down the leaf. Maple trees usually have this. 3, you have parallel veination, which is in most monocots and most grasses. They have small connecting veins. They're usually uniform. And then you have dichotomous veination, where each vein branches into 2 smaller veins, which is generally in fan leaf plants like the ginkgo. And leaves may be simple or compound in how they're arranged. Simple leaves have a single blade. Compound leaves have more than one blade. And compound leaves may be palmately compound like horse chestnuts. They may be pennantly compound like a locust tree, or even double pennantly compound like the Kentucky coffee tree. And this is another example of leaf shape and vein arrangements. Pennantly compound that it was referring to, this is a white ash, but Kentucky coffee tree leaves look much like this. The seeds were used as a coffee substitute by colonists in Kentucky and Tennessee. You have needle-like, which is like pine trees. You have scale-like, which is in red cedar, linear and hemlock. The parallel of the ginkgo, pennantly lobed, which is oak trees, the palmately compound of the horse chestnut, and then palmately lobed, which is like most maple trees. And these are all different shapes of leaves. Leaf shapes in the plant world are one of the most fascinating things. And you can see that they come in literally all shapes and sizes. A lot of these, the oblong, oblanceolate, ovate, spatulate, and oval, they're going to be more elliptic. They're going to be more common that you will run into. Not very many plants have this hastate or this sagatate shape to them. And leaf arrangement is also a way to identify plants. Opposite leaves are positioned exactly across the stem from each other with 2 leaves at each node. Maples, ash, and dogwoods have opposite leaves. Alternate leaves are arranged in like steps or spiral along the stem. Oak, willow, and sycamores have alternate leaves, and whorled leaves are found in circles around the stem with 3 or more at each node. And that would be like a catalpa tree, what we call a bean tree up north here. And this is an example of leaf arrangement. This is your alternate. They are alternating up the stem. Spiral, they're usually 2 at each node, but there's positioned differently going up. A lot of mints typically have spiral patterns. Then you have opposite, and then you have whorled. Whorled is not as common in the plant world as others are. Buds are what grow at the nodes and the tips of the stems. Basically, a bud is just a condensed form of a shoot, which will develop into either leaves or flowers. And there are 2 types of the bud: terminal bud, which can also be called the apical bud, And then you also have axillary or lateral buds. And with your apical bud, you get what is called apical dominance, which means that apical stem, which would be this is a green bean. It is what keeps growing. It is the vine that wraps around whatever it wants to wrap around, and each node is a lateral bud. And when you cut off a apical bud, the axillary or lateral buds will take over. You can think of axillary and lateral buds as basically as suckers on tomatoes. And they basically replace the top of the plant if it is lost. Axillary buds may grow into lateral branches. So when you're pruning, it's important to make the pruning cuts just above an axillary bud. It is also important that the axillary bud just below a pruning cut point is in the direction you want the plant to grow whenever possible. Otherwise, you can get shoots that grow upside down, that grow sideways, or that just look funky if you prune it wrong. And the bud or buds that you leave will be the strongest new growing point, and it will grow in whatever direction that you leave it pointing. This is an example of a proper pruning. The bud is safe from dying and drying out. And when you're wrong, the bud may dry out or die. And in this case, this whole part may rot with the node attached to it because the tissue has stopped growing. And the terminal bud of many plants produces a chemical that we call auxin, and it inhibits the growth of the lateral axillary buds, the suckers. And this is referred to, again, as I was saying, apical dominance. If the terminal bud is removed, the lateral buds will begin to grow. The strongest growing bud is frequently the one nearest the stem, nearest the end of the prune stem. So this is important to keep in mind when pruning. And when the main trunks of a tree, or when trees are topped like this for power lines or whatever, this is why a lot of branches come out. It's because of the auxin is no longer being directed toward the main trunk. All of these lateral shoots can now start coming out. Roots absorb moisture and nutrients for the entire plant, but their functions go far beyond this. Of course, they transport the moisture and nutrients to the base of the stem. They anchor the plant and provide it with physical support, and in many cases also survive as storage organs. And in some plants, roots may be used for propagation and as food. We all eat carrots, like pictured carrot is a root that we eat, radishes, rutabagas, turnips, potatoes, stuff like that is all food storage organs. With flowers, you can think of a dahlia because they have thick, fleshy roots. They are also edible, but not the ones that you grow for flowers. But in plants, the roots also differ. You usually have tap roots and fibrous roots. Tap roots are usually a dominant one root that goes really deep. Most trees have tap roots. And basically a carrot and a radish and whatnot, they're all basically tap roots. They're just one gigantic root. Other plants have fibrous roots, corn, wheat, and stuff. They have really numerous amounts of these small hair-like roots that spread off. Of course, tap roots do too, but it's just not as numerous. And roots have parts just like leaves do. They have a root cap. They have root hairs, which usually connect with fungi and bacteria. Of course, you have the root body, and you also have the epidermis. And roots also have an apical meristem. They have a dominant part that will keep growing down. And this is an example of what we call adventitious roots in corn. This is some of the corn that I have growing this year. Some plants will produce roots like this, and with such plants like most grasses can do this. Sorghum can do this. These are often referred to as brace roots. And they typically don't always grow this far up the stalk, but the first 2 or 3, 4 nodes from the bottom of the ground, the roots will actually grow out like you see them, and they will touch the soil and actually keep growing down into the soil. And these are to hold the plant in the ground, and to hold the plant up to get it more nutrients and everything. Other forms of adventitious roots, if anyone is familiar with ivy and Virginia creeper, they produce these weird growths that look like pads on human hands that help them cling to whatever they're climbing upon. Those are a form of adventitious root. And with most things like corn and sorghum, if the plant falls over, these will actually, when they touch soil, they will actually root and the plant can begin growing back upright. And then flowers are usually what we all are most familiar with. They're the showiest part, and their function is sexual reproduction. Their bright color and most often fragrance is what attracts pollinators, usually insects, but also we gardeners. And most scientific names are based on the structure of the flower. So the knowledge of flowers is pretty essential to plant identification. And you have different parts of a flower. Sepals, which is also called the calyx. You have petals, which is also called the corolla. Stamens, which are split into anthers and filaments, which is the male part that produces pollen. And then you have pistils, which is split into the stigma and the style and ovary, which are the female parts that take the pollen to produce seed. And this is a diagram of parts of the flower. You have the stigma, or the pistil, which is at the very tip, which is what receives the pollen, the style. And then you have a pollen tube that leads into the ovary and the ovules. You have your petals, which we all are usually easier and familiar with to recognize. Of course, the stem, the sepals, which are usually the green parts. You have your stamens. The filament is the stem part of the stamen, and then your anther is what looks like 2 shoes stuck together, and that's what usually produces the yellow powder that we know as pollen. A flower having all 4 parts, sepals, petals, pistils, and stamens, is called a complete flower. If one or more of these parts is missing, the flower is then designated as incomplete. Flowers containing a functional stamen and pistil are called perfect flowers. And these would be peaches or tomatoes. And if either of the parts are lacking, the flower is defined as imperfect. Again, peaches and tomatoes are good examples of perfect flowers. Insects and wind or contact will transfer the pollen from the anthers to the stigma, which pollinates the flower. The pollen will grow, fertilization occurs, and the seed will develop. These plants are generally self-pollinated. In this case, peaches usually have to have another variety or another tree in order to pollinate, but most tomatoes, peppers, beans, and peas are all self-pollinating. They've generally already pollinated before the flower even opens. Other plants such as apples and pears require pollen from a genetically different plant for fertilization, even if they may have perfect flowers. And they generally must be cross-pollinated, usually by the wind or insects, which is like corn. And we call some of these like monoecious plants, and they have flowers that have male parts and female parts separately, but on the same plant. You can think of a corn plant, the tassel is the male part, and the ears with the silk are the female part. And they're all on the same plant. Nut trees are the same way. Cucumbers and squash are as well. Dioecious produce only male or female plants. Spinach is like that, ginkgo, hollies, honey locust trees are as well. And this is an example of a monoecious plant. This is a cucumber. You have your male flower, and then you have your female flower that's all produced on the same plant. And your female flower will have a small fruit attached to it, which is what turns into the cucumber. Or if this was zucchini, it'd be the same way with zucchini. And flowers come in, just like leaves come in different shapes and everything, flowers come in different organizations of how the flowers are produced. You have spikes of flowers, you have racemes, you have panicles, corums, you have umbels. Umbels are like carrots, things in the parsley carrot family. Spikes are kind of like lobelia. Catkins are more like a lot of trees produce catkins, cymes and heads. And then we have fruits. Of course, fruits are basically fertilized and mature ovules called seeds in the ovary wall. Botanically, tomatoes are a fruit, as are squash, cucumbers, eggplants, and beans. Now, we all define these as vegetables. I will always define them, or at least call them a vegetable. But botanically speaking, all of those are an actual fruit. The ovary wall may be fleshy, like the flesh of a peach, or dry and hard, like maples and walnuts. And the edible portion of, say, like a cantaloupe and other fleshy fruit is not affected by the pollen source. It does vary between variety usually. The pollen source is only significant when the seed is eaten or being saved. Corn is an example of that. If you want pure corn of a variety that you're growing, like we grow 200 or 300 different varieties each year. I have about 200 growing this year. You have to keep them separate. And if you have field corn next to you and you're growing sweet corn for eating, you don't want them to cross together because you're going to bite into that sweet corn and probably chip a tooth, because sweet corn is meant to be soft and dent corn is not. And cantaloupe does not taste like cucumbers because of cross-pollination. Cantaloupes and cucumbers cannot cross with each other. They are separate species. Cantaloupes are Cucumis mellow and cucumbers are Cucumis sativa. And different species generally cannot cross together. With some squash and pumpkins, it's possible, but it's exceedingly rare. And fruits can be further classified as simple fruits. They develop from a single ovary, such as cherries, peaches, apples, tomatoes, nuts, maples, and poppies. Compound or aggregate fruits develop from a single flower with many ovaries. And you can think of compound aggregate fruits as most of your berries, blackberries, strawberries, raspberries, etc. Multiple fruits are derived from a tight cluster of independent flowers born in a single structure. Examples of multiple fruits would be pineapples, figs, beets. And then, of course, you have a seed, which is a terrible picture of parts of the seed, but the seed is the reproductive part of the plant. They generally have three main parts: an embryo, which is a partially developed plant, which is in a dormant state. The endosperm is usually comprised of starch. It is the food supply for the embryo. Then you have a hard seed coat, which protects the embryo and the endosperm inside. Germination is the beginning of seed growth. It is when a seed is sprouting. And for a seed to sprout, for germination to occur, the proper environmental conditions have to exist. There must be moisture, oxygen, and favorable temperature. And in the case of some plants, some seeds require light before they germinate. Poppies are like that. Some weeds like amaranth and lamb's quarters are like that. They need light to germinate. And a lot of seeds may not germinate immediately after ripening. and they may remain dormant for a time. And generally seeds are dormant because of a hard seed coat. Some need to be soaked in water, nicked with a file. Morning glory seed is a good example of that. Some seed is even harder, and you have to treat it with like sulfuric acid or something. And other seeds may require cold treatment, which we call stratification, for several weeks in order to help break down that seed coat and make the seed where they actually can absorb water and sprout. And an example of the may not germinate immediately after, a good example is fermenting tomatoes, which I was doing before this lecture actually. With tomatoes, for those of us that have eaten them, when you cut them open, you've probably seen that the seeds are surrounded by a really gooey mass of mucus. And this is a protective coat around the seed in case the fruit would start to rot. And in order for, or when we buy, or when you buy tomato seeds from a store or something, they have already went through the process that you see in these jars. For tomato seeds to sprout, you have to ferment them. You have to take the seed out, the gooey mass, you have to let it basically rot and be eaten off by bacteria and mold that you see in this picture. The cat does not help in the process. He just oversees everything. Or when he was still alive, Satchmo. And only when that mucus is eaten off with tomatoes, some melons are like that, only then will your seeds sprout. Otherwise, you can throw a tomato in your compost and it may not sprout for 3 years because it could take up to 3 years for that goo that surrounds them to be eaten off for water to be able to penetrate the seed coat to allow the seed to sprout. So you have to generally ferment tomatoes and cucumbers and cantaloupes and everything before the seed you would save yourself if you're doing it is viable to be planted. And of course, seeds cannot germinate unless they are alive, and they live longer when maintained in cool and dry conditions. A seed is a living organism. It is just in a dormant state. Any leftover seed packets you may have, you should store in either airtight containers in your refrigerator, or as we at Roughwood recommend, put them in your freezer. It will not hurt the plants in any way at all, because when you put it in the freezer, it will kill any insects that may be living in the seed, any bacteria or fungi on the seed, and it will also keep the seed dormant for long periods of time. We usually put all of our seed in the freezer. If we're out of space, we will put it in the fridge, but you generally should put any leftover seed that you're saving in the freezer. That's the best and safest place for it. And seed stored properly can live several years. It is varied with how long. Most seed left at room temperature, if you leave it in like a basement or a closet where it's kind of cool and dry, most seed would generally average a lifespan of about 2 to 3 years. But if you have it in the freezer, your seed can last literally 40 years, 50 years, 100 years. It just really depends on the quality of the seed and everything. And now we're going to get into plant growth and development. We're going to be talking about now photosynthesis. And one of the major differences between plants and animals is that plants manufacture their food, or most plants manufacture their food as the form of sugar, carbohydrates, through photosynthesis. Animals cannot do this, hence why humans are not green. And to manufacture sugar, a plant requires energy from light, carbon dioxide from the air, water, and a suitable temperature. Photosynthesis itself literally means to put together with light. Carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of light equals or yields simple sugars. and oxygen is given off. The oxygen that we breathe and that life on Earth breathes is produced by plants photosynthesizing. Plants store the energy from the light first as a simple sugar, and then those may be converted to other sugars and starches and transported to various storage areas. This is a diagram. Basically, plants take in light, water through the roots, CO2 through the leaves, and it creates sugar and also yields oxygen as well. Any green plant is capable of photosynthesis. However, the leaves are the site of most sugar production because of their surface area and specialized structure for that purpose. Stems can photosynthesize, but when photosynthesis stops, plants will stop growing. And of course, if it stops long enough, the plant will actually die because plants cannot survive if they're not making their own food. And any factors required for photosynthesis, whether it be carbon dioxide, water, light, temperature, can limit this process. Most plants do not actively grow or do anything during the day because it is too hot. That's why most plants will grow at night. That's why they tell you to water at night. Or early morning or late evening, because plants actively grow at night because the temperature is cooler, and they have absorbed enough where they can manufacture their own food after the sun has went down. And again, of course, photosynthesis cannot be emphasized, and it's important. All plant life relies directly or indirectly on photosynthesis. Basically, all animal life feeds directly or indirectly on it. And there's also a process called respiration, which is the process where sugars and starches are converted into energy. Photosynthesis produces sugar, it stores energy and releases oxygen and uses water, uses carbon dioxide, uses and occurs in sunlight, and it occurs in chloroplasts, which are in the plant cells, and they have chlorophyll in them, which is the green part that helps them be able to photosynthesize. Respiration uses sugars for energy. It releases energy. It uses oxygen, produces water, produces carbon dioxide, and occurs in darkness and light. Most plants will respirate during the evening, and respiration to us humans is sweating, so you can think of it for plants as them sweating as well. And respiration occurs in all cells. Transpiration is the process by which a plant loses water vapor, primarily through leaf stomates and stomata. It is part of a complex system of water movement through plants. The amount of water loss depends on many environmental factors. Temperature is the biggest, humidity is as well. But wind, leaf thickness and shape, cuticle thickness, light intensity, and plant turgor is all part of it as well. It's not just one thing, which brings us into factors that affect plant growth. Temperature is the main environmental factor that affects plant growth. It determines planting dates, growing season, and what plants can be grown in a locality. It contributes to the rate of plant growth and plant quality. We all know that if it is too hot, plants generally don't do as well. If it is too cold, plants will do not well either. Most cannot grow if it's cold. And plant hardiness refers to whether a plant or plant part will survive outdoors in a given location. The chief determinant of hardiness is the degree of similarity between the conditions in the garden and those in the plant's natural habitat, especially in regards to soil type, fertility, drainage, air temperature, soil temperature, humidity levels, light, and rainfall. We here in the US have what they call a US hardiness zone, which will usually tell you if a plant will survive in our climate. So for Tennessee, if you were growing a saguaro cactus from Arizona, it would not survive the winter. And if you were growing a palm tree in Tennessee, it would also generally not survive because it just cannot survive the winter that we have. Seeds also will not grow into temperatures within a specific range. Optimum temperature and speed of germination in vegetables generally varies. And it's usually split between cool season and warm season plants. Cool season plants require cool temperatures to germinate, grow, and mature properly. Generally, they can withstand a pretty considerable frost. Some can withstand light freezes. And pansies, daffodils, peas, spinach, lettuce, broccoli, cauliflower, kohlrabi, kale, most of your brassicas are cool season plants. They absolutely hate hot weather. So they are either planted in early spring or generally in the fall. Warm season plants require warm temperatures to germinate, grow, and mature properly. They are generally deep-rooted and resistant to drought. Frost will kill or damage most warm season crops. And of course, you can think of warm season as zinnias, sunflowers, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, okra, squash, pumpkins, plants like that. They hate cold weather and they will not germinate generally if temperatures are not at least around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. With cool season, a lot of those can germinate at, some can germinate at 40 degrees or 50 degrees. Growth and fruit set is also temperature driven. And it's also, temperature also of course drives and affects photosynthesis. Temperature extremes, whether it's hot or cold, can reduce photosynthesis and growth rate. And it can also cause bud and blossom or fruit damage, fruit drop in many crops such as tomatoes or peppers. This is why some plants will become unproductive during the summer months. The tomatoes that I have in the garden right now for seed saving, they quit producing fruit and flowers for about the last month or so because we've been up in the hundreds here in Pennsylvania, which is usually unheard of. And they just shut down because it's too hot. And a lot of the fruits that I had that were on the plants, they rotted because the humidity got too high and it just got too hot. And in most cases, if it's too hot or cold, the fruit will either wither away or it will be aborted completely. Light is also an important factor affecting plant growth. It has three principal characteristics: quantity, quality, and duration. Quantity of light refers to the intensity or brightness. Some plants require relatively low light. You can think of that as plants that usually would grow in an understory in a forest. Hostas don't really like a lot of light. They prefer a low intensity light. That's why they are more shade plants. And low light plants must be put in low light areas such as shade. Otherwise, they will usually scorch or even die. Most of your plants, though, grow best in full sun. Young plants may grow tall and leggy if the light is not bright enough or long enough. Some plants will prefer part shade, part sun. It really all depends on what plant you're wanting to grow. Red and blue light are the most effective for plant growth. Green light is reflected by plants and is the least effective. Incandescent light is generally high in red and orange light, and produces too much heat to be effective as a lighting source for plants. Cool white fluorescent lights are high in blue light and encourage leafy growth. So you ideally want a mixture of the two. If you're doing indoor growing or anything, most indoor systems have blue and red. Some have other colors as well. The duration of light is also important. Light duration, or photo period, as it's also called, refers to the amount of time a plant is exposed to light. We used to think that the amount of actual light that a plant got is what triggered flowering, but this was actually false. It is the length, the amount or the length of uninterrupted darkness that a plant receives that triggers flower. And you may ask, why is this important? This is me a few years ago in Tennessee. The shed behind me is a 40-foot shed, and those are corn stalks. The corn is about at least 30 feet tall. And my expertise is in heirloom seed, heirloom corn as well. And the corn you see in the picture is from parts of Mexico, Central and South America. If you grow it here in the US, it will generally not get below 15 feet tall, because it stays in a vegetative state of reproduction, because it is not getting enough darkness. Because these are grown near the equator, they usually get anywhere between 12 and 18 hours of darkness, and it triggers them to tassel and produce ears at the same time. But in this case, the plants just keep growing and growing until we usually hit the photo period that they prefer, which in the US is generally not until about 2 weeks before frost. So I generally just get gigantic corn and nothing else. But this is what we call photoperiodic. Most plants that you will encounter are day leaf neutral. They don't care about the photo period. But I bring this up because some plants are photoperiodic. And we were having a very odd period of weird seed where it was making it to this country from other parts of the world. And some people that you may encounter may be like me. I have legal permits from the USDA that I can import seed from other countries to grow. So it's important to understand photo period. These are what most of us in the South call butter beans. These are lima beans. These are part of my personal collection. These are all from South America. These are not all of them are completely edible. The yellow ones have enough cyanide in them that they'll kill you in 10 minutes if you eat one. But other plants like beans, corn, squash, peppers and stuff brought from another country to the US can have photoperiod issues, or what we also call Dayling sensitivity. When I grew these lima beans in Tennessee, I had lima bean vines that were over 100 feet long because they did not flower until October or November before frost, because that's when they get their proper photo period. But water, of course, is also a very important thing that affects plant growth. Rainfall is generally the primary source of water for plants grown outdoors. It is very vital for plant growth. It is the primary component for photosynthesis. It maintains a plant's sugar pressure and is what transports nutrients throughout the plant. Of course, those of us that water ourselves or with sprinklers and everything, we're imitating nature doing it. The acquisition of water, plants will acquire most of their water from the soil through the roots, specifically the root hairs. Seedlings will generally be quickly killed by a lack of water. Larger plants suffering from a lack of water generally will wilt. They will stop growing, turn yellow, drop leaves, become stunted, and if they don't receive water in time, they will eventually die. The loss of water, plants will lose water through all of their parts, but most is lost through the leaves. This is because water loss is proportional to the surface area exposed to air. Bigger leaved plants lose more water than smaller leaved plants. And if you grow a drought tolerant plant in a part of your garden, or someone grows it in a field or something that is wet, that plant will not be successful because it wants to be grown in drier conditions because that's what it's adapted to. Same with a plant that is used to swamp conditions. If you try to grow a water hibiscus, swamp mallow, or something like cattails, if you try to grow them in dry soil, they will not succeed either. So you've got to kind of find a balance between what you're growing. And plants will reduce the water loss by closing their stomates, their stomata. And I put this in here. It's probably not in the handbook, but as a master gardener, you should be aware. There is a very odd group of plants in the plant world known as parasitic plants. They kind of defy all the rules and laws of what I just went over. Because as a master gardener, you may encounter someone that has a question about one of these, or you may encounter this yourself at some point. But parasitic plants evolve to be parasites, like fleas and ticks on our pets or humans. Parasitic plants derive their nourishment from other photosynthesizing plants. The top left plant is called squaw root. It is parasitic on oak trees in forests. To your left is a plant that we generally start seeing right about this time of year or around Labor Day in beech forests, called beech drops. And you see that they, alongside the Rafflesia, which is native to the tropics, we don't have those here. I wish we did. The what we call broom rape or a banshee, the genus, and then the what looks like spaghetti called daughter vine. You see they don't have any green functioning parts to them at all. That's because they do not photosynthesize. They have specialized roots called haustoria that attach to like an oak tree, to a beech tree. With broom rape, you get that on corn, tomatoes. California is having a bad broom rape problem right now. And they basically steal the water and the sugar that the photosynthesizing plant has put together, and for its own nourishment. You have plants though like mistletoe, which we're probably somewhat common with seeing. And you have other plants like one of the native wildflowers called Indian paintbrush. They are hemiparasitic. They're only partially parasitic. They have green leaves to an extent, and they produce some of their own food, but they also steal food from other plants as well. So you at least should be aware of parasitic plants. They look weird. They don't look like anything. They look alien more than anything. So in conclusion, every plant is usually hardy in its natural native habitat because it's adapted and survived the distinctive conditions there, usually for thousands, millennia, if not. Flowering plants have evolved a range of strategies and structures that enable them to survive and reproduce in diverse habitats. And knowing how plants function and understanding their life cycle are vital to raising and maintaining healthy specimens and just having a good garden in general. So I will now open this up for anyone that has questions. Carla will have this recorded, as she said. This is a long presentation. I could have went into 3 times more detail, but it would have been 8 more hours long had I did so. And right now for me, it's 9 o'clock in Pennsylvania because we're an hour ahead up here. So I will open this up for questions if anyone has questions of any sort. And Francis asked, do LED lights allow for plant growth? They do. And that's what I was saying. If they're red and blue, that's the kind that you won't generally. And most LED lights, typically they have some kind of red or blue in them now. I would try to maybe be sure you're getting plant focused LED lights. Of course, we have LED lights that are just for us humans to look at stuff with or to look fancy with and everything. But most plant horticulture-based LED lights are good for plant growth. You just need to be sure you have them close enough or far enough so they don't burn or stretch too badly. That's always one of the issues with LED lights. It's why I try to start seed in the greenhouse and not under LED lights. But we had to this year because our winter up here lasted into May.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box, but we can ask here with our live audience and see if we've gotten any questions. Nothing? No? Are you overwhelmed? Are you? Okay.
More than likely overwhelmed.
Okay, well, we can always come back if you think of something later after you've read over the material. A lot of this stuff, it's going to build on what Stephen talked about today. And so when you look at the plant diseases and looking at specific parts of plants and things like that, so it's all going to come together. So I would suggest just going back and reading the chapter. If you have questions, bring them next week and I can help answer them. Stephen's father, Hebron, is actually teaching next week, and so he can answer the questions too. So if you think of things, during the week, just go ahead and write them down, bring them with you next week. Okay, we did.
So what we discussed is in this first one.
Yes, in the botany chapter. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure on the chapters. Okay, the book is not in order of the presentations. I will say that the presentations are in the order that I could get the speakers to come in and speak. So we just have to relate the title to the chapter in your book. So, okay.
Do
Yes.
you have a list of the speakers so that we can make it free up on the chapter?
Yes, an agenda was sent out to everybody through the email. It was an attachment on one of the last emails that I sent out. So yes. And I tried to note on that agenda, the schedule, when the speaker would be here in person and when they would be online. So just go back to your agenda. If you didn't get that email, let me know. Send me an email, give me a call tomorrow, and I'll try to get that taken care of as soon as possible. So, all right. Well, we appreciate everybody being here tonight, and thank you, Stephen, very much.
You're
And
very welcome.
again,
Thank you. Coffee's ready.
oh, coffee's ready now. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you all. We'll see you next week. Yeah, soils will be next week.